Some of the default settings in World of Warships are not ideal for new players, in my opinion. Wargaming, the developers, like to keep the UI very clean, but I think maybe a little bit too clean. There's some information that new players really need that are off by default. I'm Stats, I'm a veteran World of Warships streamer on Twitch, and I'm going to help you understand how this works. I'm going to go through each one of these tabs in turn. There's going to be more on some tabs than others. On this display tab, there's only a couple of things. One is if you want to change this resolution to something other than your screen resolution, like maybe if you want to go down to 720 on a very low powered machine, you can't do it in full screen windowed because that's just going to give you the screen resolution. You need to change to full screen, and then that enables you to change to, say, 1280 by 720. Just something to note. Also, ignore the fact that I've got 125% UI scale. That's just to make it easier for this video so that you can see it more easily. However, if you're on a 1440 or a 4K screen, you might want to turn this up so that you can see things a little bit more easily. On the graphics tab, there's only a couple of things that I want to highlight. One is this auto config button. I think it does this by default when you install the game, but if you press it, it's going to set up according to the power of your machine. Obviously, you can come in and fiddle things. There's a couple of accessibility things in here. One is increase GUI contrast. This actually changes the opacity on some of the elements, especially in the port, that might make things a little bit easier to read, or in my case, I just like the way it looks. Also, coming down, there's this one at the bottom. Fog transparency. This description is a bit misleading because at 100 fog transparency, the fog is not transparent, and at 0 fog transparency, the fog is completely invisible. So I think this should actually say fogginess or something like that. But basically, if it's on 100, it's going to be maximum fog. If it's on 0, it's going to be minimum fog. And the reason that this is important is that in the game, there is actually a very beautiful fog effect, but it can hurt your ability to see things in certain conditions on certain maps and to aim. And so some players like to either turn this off completely or to turn it down just so that they can aim, especially at longer ranges. Personally, I like the game to look really pretty, and so I leave it on 100. But you might like to bring that down if you're struggling to see things. In the audio section, none of this is to do with gameplay or learning the game, but there's a couple of settings that I want to point out to you. In the common section, the default for sound quality is actually high, so you might like to change this to ultra. This is going to maybe do a little extra download, and you might have to restart the client, but that's going to make sure that you get the best possible audio quality. In the music section, there's actually 4 different playlists that you can choose from. Standard, Cinematic, Modern, and War Drums. Just play around with these and see which one you like. But if you're not into like full-on music while you're playing games, you might like to try War Drums. It's a percussive soundtrack that dynamically reacts to what's going on in the game. It's just a different alternative. You can also obviously have music just in the port or just in battle. In the effects section, there's something that I want to highlight, which is that the default is standard. And when you are on standard or cinematic, simple, or night, you can't see these sliders, and so you can't actually adjust them exactly how you want them. So if you want to adjust the individual sound sliders, you must change it to custom, and then you get access to change the ambient sound interface, the engines, and so on. And if you mouse over what these are, it will tell you roughly what that includes. It can be a little bit tricky to figure out what some sounds come under. You have to do a bit of trial and error. But yeah, if you change this to custom, you get the sliders and you can play with it. One section that players struggle to understand how it exactly works is the voiceover section. Ignore the fact that I've got a 0 volume here. It's because I don't use the voices. The language and modification drop-downs work together, and you kind of have to understand how they work. So this first one is the base language for the game. This is like what you want to hear things in when there's nothing else selected. So that's probably going to be your mother tongue. So I'm British, so for me that's English United Kingdom. And then that works in tandem with this. You've got 3 main options: standard, national, and extended. If you choose standard, which is the default, then you're going to hear this language most of the time. So that's going to be your ship, it's going to be the other ships of the other players, it's going to be the bots, it's going to be the voiceover, everything. With one exception, which is if you use a special commander. If you use like an anime collaboration commander or like a Transformers collaboration commander or something like that, Kong, Godzilla, then you will hear that commander on your ship. and not on other players' ships if they have that commander. If you change this to national, what it does is it takes the nationality of the ship, whether it be your ship or other people's ships, and it gives that ship that nationality's voice. So a French ship will have a French voice, and a German ship will have a German language voice, and so on and so on. But with this setting, you won't hear any of those special commanders. So you won't hear Arpeggio, Azure Lane, King Kong, whatever. If you want to hear that, then you can change it to extended, which is the same thing as national, except it includes the special commanders. So then if someone else has an anime commander or a Godzilla commander or whatever on their ship, you will also hear that. If they just have a standard, say, German commander, then you'll hear a German voice, and so on. You can also, if you have one of those special commanders, like you can see a huge, I've got all the special commanders, so you can see this is the list of all the special commanders. If you have one of these, it will appear in this list. And without having to actually use the commander itself on the ship, you can actually use the voice. So let's say I want to use an Azure Lane commander, Hipper. I'm going to hear, if I set it like this, so my mother tongue and then a specific commander, this will be the voice of every single player's ship in the whole game. So every voice you hear will be Admiral Hipper if the Admiral Hipper voice has a line for that thing. If the Admiral Hipper voice doesn't have a line for whatever that thing is, you will hear this instead. One last little thing. Some people get confused by this. The game actually does have voice, VoIP. But it's only for divisions. People think when they turn this on, they're going to be able to hear other people in the game, only if you're divisioned with them. But it does have voice chat, and I haven't used it myself, but I've heard it's actually pretty good. So what you do is you make sure that's enabled, you division up with someone who also has it enabled, and then you can use V as a push-to-talk button. Okay, this page is really important. HUD. Crosshair, not as important as everyone thinks it is. Don't worry about that. Just choose one and go with it. This is the really, really important one. Interface, view, this here. This is my biggest bugbear. The default is simple. And this means that you won't have access to a lot of information in the battle interface without holding the Alt key. So if you hold the Alt key while it's on simple, things like the names of the ships, for example, will pop up on the screen. But as soon as you let go of the Alt key, they disappear. And those kind of things are really, really, really important, like numerical hit points, for example. If you change this to full, you get all that information all the time, so you don't have to hold down the Alt key. And yes, this does make the interface a lot busier, but it's absolutely vital information that every player needs to have in order to play the game. So yes, you can press Alt to get that information, but because you need that information all the time, just set this to full. If you're a new player, please just do this and thank me later, okay? And then later on, if you want to come back, if you're like, it's too busy, I just want it to be a bit cleaner, then you can choose between these two. And then you can hold down Alt to get all the information. But when you're learning the game, please just choose full and you'll be better off. Adaptive is kind of halfway in between the two, where it's going to give you information about things you're aiming at, things you're looking at through the binocular view. So it's kind of like a halfway house in between the two. But when you're starting out, choose full. Just underneath that, team lineups. This is the panels on the side, on the left and right, that show you your team and the enemy team's ships. The vanilla, the unmodded sidebars are completely useless, so just turn those off. But there are mods available that make those sidebars really useful by doing things like adding the hit points of the ships. But if you're not going to mod the game, just turn that off because they're completely pointless. Performance is the ping and the frame rate. You might want to turn that on, especially if you're on a new machine or you're new to the game, just to check that it's performing okay. Additional damage counters. This is really, really important for new players. Turn this on because it will give you an indicator of your spotting damage total and your potential damage total. Those are out of scope for this video, but if you turn those on, it's going to give you more information about how you are playing. Battle chat. There is obviously in-game text chat that you can use to talk to other players on both teams, and that can be useful for passing on information to other players and reading about what they want to do, their plans, their strategy, whatever information that they have about other players on the enemy team. But obviously, an online game, it does get a little bit salty every now and again, bad language, whatever. So if you're a bit sensitive to that, you can just turn it off. Or if you're setting up the game for maybe your child to play, then maybe turn that off. Finally, on the HUD tab, hitting terrain, this is if you're going to hit an island with your guns when you shoot. It's not a perfect mechanism. Sometimes it'll lead you astray by saying you will when you won't and won't when you will, but it's better to have this on than not. So make sure that's on. I actually can't remember the default for that one. Separate armament reloading. This is also really important for new players, and it's off by default, I think. So make sure this is turned on. And it's going to show you your guns when you're on your torps and your torps when you're on your guns in terms of how quickly they're reloading, so that you can see, even if you're not on your torpedoes, have they reloaded. And this one, times for modifiers, this is time for fire and flood duration. This is actually something that Wargaming removed a while ago, and the community complained so hard that they put it back in again. I was actually one of the key campaigners to get this put back in. I'm very glad they did it, because knowing how long your fire is running for is sometimes a really, really, really important thing to know. So make sure on. The camera tab is largely personal preference. These two up here control what the floating camera looks like in terms of the field of view and the height above the ship. Personally, I like to have as big and wide of a view as possible around what's going on in my ship, just because it makes it easier to see what's going on and easier to drive, but it's maybe a bit less cinematic. So just fiddle with these to your own content. It's not going to affect your aiming because, of course, when you zoom in, you're not using these settings, so it's purely a cosmetic thing. So just set those according to your preference. Underneath that, there's a few settings that you might want to be aware of, but probably don't need to change. Track lock target just makes the camera move with the target, so most people have that turned on. Switching the camera is on by default. How this works is kind of a little bit out of the scope of this video, so just leave that turned on, it's totally fine. Restore the camera position when exiting free look mode. Again, this is a personal preference thing. I think most people have this turned on. It just means that you go back to wherever you were when you zoom out using the shift key. And then this last one is a new one, relatively new as I'm recording this video, and this makes the camera shake when you get hit. If you find that distracting, just turn it off. Mouse settings are pretty much self-explanatory. So I won't talk about what these are because it's obvious. However, there is one thing that I want to talk about, which is scroll zooming. So there's a scroll wheel sensitivity, and scroll is predominantly used in the game when you're in binocular view, or in the third person camera to zoom in and out. And a lot of new players get into the habit of zooming in and out using their scroll wheel, which takes a long time because to zoom all the way in to your sort of where you'd be aiming, it's quite a lot of finger movement. And a lot of players get into the habit of zoom, 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 zoom with the scroll wheel, shoot, and then zoom, 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 zoom out with the scroll wheel. That is not how you should do it. You should use the shift key. So from the floating camera, the shift key will zoom you all the way into wherever you're looking, and then pressing the shift key again will zoom you all the way out back to where you were. When you're zoomed in, you can actually click back a couple of notches to zoom out slightly if you need a little bit more room to give more lead. That's quite common when you're shooting a fast ship at long range, because your shells will take a long time to arrive, so you might need to give quite a lot of lead. So maybe if you're shooting like a fast French destroyer, for example, zoom in using the shift key and then give it a couple of clicks with the scroll wheel to zoom out, and that'll give you enough space to lead. And then next time you zoom in using the shift key, that setting will be maintained for the rest of the match. The next match, it's reset to full zoom, and then you have to do it again. In the controls tab, again, it's pretty much self-explanatory. Maybe just go through here and familiarize yourself with what all the controls that are available are and what the keys are. Obviously, you're not going to learn them in one go, but you'll learn them as you go along. But definitely familiarize yourself with the sections. There is one, though, that I want to draw your attention to specifically, and that is this one, Select Priority AA Sector. I highly recommend that you map the alternative key or even the main key to spacebar, because this is something that you're going to be doing during the middle of battle. You'll be fighting using your guns, fighting another ship, and then a carrier turns up with its planes and tries to attack you, and you need to sector your AA while you're in the middle of doing a whole load of other stuff. And so you want that to be as quick as possible, and O, which is the default in most regions, is a little bit too far away. So your thumb is probably not doing much and it's probably resting on the spacebar anyway. And so space is a really, really good alternative key for priority sector. So just click here, press the spacebar, and then you'll be able to sector your AA very, very quickly. One last setting in the other section for new players, and that is this one, which by default, I don't know why is on. This means that your ship in all views will try its absolute best to avoid going near islands. And in this game, it is absolutely vital that you can play near islands, especially in some particular types of ships. So you need to turn this off. Like, don't even think about it. Just turn it off. Learn to play the game without the collision avoidance system. Look around you. Islands don't move. They're always the same. The maps are not procedurally generated. Turn this off, learn the maps, use the minimap, which you should, by the way, increase in size because the default minimap size is ridiculously small. Just press your plus key a few times, find out what the maximum size of the map is, and maybe take it down one tick. But you need the minimap to be nice and big. That's going to show you where the islands are. And make sure this is turned off. And an island should never jump out at you. If an island surprises you, it's because you weren't paying attention. If you found this video helpful, I stream full-time on Twitch and you are very welcome to pop by my channel and ask any questions that you have and I will try my best to help you. Twitch.tv/StatsBloke. I'll see you there.